Imagine this experience. You just purchased the perfect fly rod, reel, and line combo. You got a map of where to go and you're going to get your shot at a trout. Then you arrive at the river and make your way to the water. After getting to the water, you stop only to see a few fish rising. You wonder if a dry fly is the best first fly to put on, or maybe a nymph, maybe go below the surface. But either way, you're stuck and you're not sure what to put on first. My guest today produces fly fishing content for multiple publications, is a self-proclaimed fly rod geek, and even builds his own bamboo fly rods. Today, he's going to show you how to choose the right fly pattern for any trout situation you are confronted with, even if it's your first time on the water. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up in a fly shop and created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone in the world. Today, Spencer Durant is here. He's the Untangled podcast host, mid-current writer, and Ventures Fly Co. guru. He's going to walk us through the top 3 things you need to know when choosing the right fly for any situation. You're going to find out which one of these 3 is the least important, and what to know when you're changing out your flies, and which are his top flies that you should have the water in any situation. Plus, you're going to find out his take on gear reviews and how he handles a piece of gear he's reviewing that doesn't quite meet expectations. He's got 13 Winston fly rods at home, so we are dealing with a 100% fly fishing addict today. Let's find out what makes him tick. Here we go. Spencer Durant from venturesflyco.com. How you doing, Spencer?
I'm doing great, Dave, man. It's good to be here. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. This is awesome. I don't do a lot of these. A lot of my stuff is audio only, so I always love when we get these together because, and you have a great mic, so a fellow podcaster, I know the audio is going to be awesome. So, and we just did a podcast. I guess the cool thing is we could circle back and look at the one that we did together on your show.
Yep.
And we can highlight that one. But today we're going to talk about a really important topic, which is choosing the right fly. I think a lot of people out there, sometimes you hear this with steelhead fishing and other fishing where it's like, the fly doesn't matter too much. But I think there's a lot of places like in trout fishing, especially where the fly is very critical. So today we're going to dig into that, kind of help somebody, whether they're a beginner, kind of, into it. But before we get there, let's take it back to fishing. How'd you get in? Because you got a lot going, mid-current, you got Untangled, you got all this stuff. What's your first memory of fly fishing? How'd you get into it?
First one, I was 6 years old, I think. I remember distinctly my dad and I got in the car, and I remember my dad telling my mom, all right, we'll be back in a little bit. We're going to the grocery store. And we left, and we started going up the canyon, and I turned to my dad, and I was like, this isn't the grocery store. He's like, nice. No, be quiet. And he took me off to go fishing, and I grew up in what used to be like a rural part of Utah. It's not rural anymore because they built houses everywhere. It's turning into like the mini California. It's really kind of sad. But we got to the family creek. There's a little spring creek that flows through some land that my family settled way back in 1848.
Wow.
So we got some family ties back to that. So
Holy cow.
Yeah. And so we pulled up there, we parked, and we get in the river, and it was just wet waiting. It was middle of summer. And my dad pulls his fly rod out. He's like, okay, I'm going to catch a few fish, then we'll go to the store. And he caught, it was more than a few, and we were gone for like 3 hours. And I remember he's fishing dry flies the whole time, and he lets a fish go, and I remember it swims over my feet as he lets it go downstream, and I was like, yeah, that was cool. And since then, I've just been kind of enamored with it, and I just did it. I went to the dark side for a little bit during high school. I became a big-time jig fisherman, and I tried to tell my dad that it was better than fly fishing for a while, because I grew up doing both. I bait fished a lot back in high school. And then towards the end of high school, I just kind of wanted to get back into fly fishing. I don't really know what made me want to dedicate time to it, but I did dedicate a lot more time to it, and it's been all she wrote ever since. So it's been a lot of fun.
So cool.
Yeah.
Well, here's my first big question. So your mom, when she finds out, how did your mom take it? Did she take it harshly, or what was she like?
Well, yeah, she wasn't very happy about it. And my mom is great, by the way, but she was pretty unhappy because we came home with no groceries, and we were both sopping wet. We got mud everywhere in the house. the fishing was so good that we didn't go to the store because by the time we got done, the store was closed. So yeah, it was kind of funny. So I remember we get back home and my mom's like, "Where are the groceries? You didn't go to the store?" And I'm like, I just remember my dad like, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll get them tomorrow." And I was just grinning. I didn't know what was going on. I was just a kid. I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, that's so good. Good. So you got it in your life. You've had it sounds like most of your life now. You got a lot going on here. We mentioned it. You've got this podcast, the Midcurrent, and everything. I mean, ventures. Like, when did this start to take over? Where you're like, man, I'm going to start getting into the industry and doing all this stuff.
Yeah, that was a little after I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when I got back from that, they sent a kid from small town Utah to New York City, which was a trip.
Wow.
Yeah, that was...
Holy
and they told me to speak Spanish. They said, "Here, go baptize people and speak Spanish." So that was...
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. Oh my goodness, that was a lot. Good time, but a lot. And I got back from that and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to college. And I just got into fishing enough and I was like, I'm gonna keep doing this. I'm gonna keep fishing. I'm gonna figure this out. And I spent a lot of time on the Lower Provo. I was living in my grandma's basement, not too far from the Lower Provo River there in Provo, Utah, and just had a blast doing it. And it got to the point where I want to start writing about it. I'd always written growing up. I wrote for the school paper in high school. And then actually right when I got home from that mission, I got a job with the Utah Jazz. I worked in the NBA for a little bit. Yeah. I was a writer for the team. So spent a little bit of time in the sports world. Yeah.
Amazing. What years were that when you were with the Utah Jazz?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Or what was I'm just trying to picture because they had, the John Stockton years, Karl Malone, those were amazing years.
Yeah, it wasn't then. They sucked. They sucked when I was, it was the 2013-14 season.
Oh, okay. So yeah, this is more recent. Gotcha.
Yeah, it was a little bit more recent. And it was a good time. But got to play around in that, did some more sports work. I did some stuff for the AP, for college football, for BYU football and Utah basketball. It was a lot of fun. But I was writing, sports was fun, and it just wasn't as, like, I remember being upset that all my weekends were being taken up with games because I couldn't go fishing. And that's kind of when I was like, I'm going to try this fishing. I made it in the sports writing world a little bit. I wouldn't say that I made it like I wasn't a big deal or anything, but I'd had a foothold there. I was like, well, if I got a foothold here, I could figure it out in the fly fishing world. And it was exponentially tougher to get started in outdoor writing than sports writing, which you wouldn't think would be the case, but it was harder work to get my first story published in Field and Stream than it was interviewing Stephen Curry, for example.
No kidding.
Yeah. It was bizarre to me that it was that tough, but the work paid off. And, here I am. I'm the news and gear editor for Midcurrent. I write columns for Hatch Magazine, and now I'm doing all the content over at Ventures Flyco. So yeah, I got a lot going on now.
That's amazing. Yeah, you do have a lot going on. And Stephen Curry. So you interviewed him on kind of for an article.
Yeah. I talked to him, a whole bunch of the other NBA players from back then.
Oh wow.
So yeah,
there you go. Yeah, and Stephen Curry is obviously one of the greatest. Probably greatest shooters of all time, maybe.
Oh, the greatest shooter ever.
No question.
Yeah.
I remember, to take a tangent here, I remember, I'm old enough to remember Del Curry.
Yeah.
Right? His dad. And I remember he was a sharpshooter too, but I don't think anywhere close to the whole thing that happened. And I love Steve Kerr as well. I always loved, but the way the game went to, it's crazy because I was a basketball player. And I remember shooting, even now, it's like, I'll shoot no way am I making an NBA shot. But these guys are shooting from like half court.
I know.
Like, what happened to the NBA and how are guys shooting that far? It's just crazy, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And like I go back and I grew up with the Darren Williams, Carlos Boozer era Jazz. Those were my teams. So we lost to the Pau Gasol, Kobe Bryant, Andrew Bynum Lakers in the playoffs a bunch. And you go back, you watch those weren't that long ago, and the game's completely different.
Yeah.
Right. The Lakers were playing 2 7-footers, and now you can't do that unless you've got guys that can both shoot the three.
That shoot the three on the 7-footer, right?
Yeah, it's insane.
That guy that's 7'6" and shoots the three, and that's like, right? I think what's happened is you see as you get to this thing, it's almost, well, maybe we can make the analogy to fly fishing, but
Yeah.
at some point, and this is good for you because you did the sports, at some point, do you raise the rim?
No, you can't mess with stuff like that because then it invalidates all the stats that came before it. Like, Wilt scored 100 in a game, and the closest we've got since then is Kobe's 81. No, it was 83. Was it 81 or 83? Now I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in the 80s, right?
Yeah, that's right.
They did that all on a 10-foot hoop. We got to keep it. We got to keep it there.
Yeah, you're right. That's too great. All right. So let's get back into this again. We'll leave some basketball to the end, but so back into it. So mid-current, you've got ventures, you got all this stuff going. I want to hear about the podcast because this is really interesting to me. When did you think of the podcast? Have you always had that interest? When did you launch that?
Yeah, I've had an interest in podcasts for a long time. Actually had a very short-lived one a few years ago. So I was like, I'm going to get into it. I'm going to do it. And then I didn't stick with it like 99% of podcasters. And then I met the guys at Ventures. I actually met them on the river one day. That's how we got hooked up to work together. I was out of flies, and I was like, hey, do you guys have any flies? And they're like, do we? They gave me a couple of flies, and I got to keep fishing. It was really nice. And that sort of spawned this partnership. And then when I joined the team there 2 years ago now, we talked about different content ideas. Podcast is one of them. And we started it December of 2023. No, it can't. No.
Longer than that.
December 22. There we go.
Yeah, 22.
22. Yeah. I was like, it wasn't just this last December.
So you're going on 2 years.
Yeah, December of 22. Yep. We did it. And it's been tons of fun. We knew like our niche is beginners, right?
Yeah.
We want to help the beginners out. We want to make it more accessible. And so we knew the podcast was just going to be an extension of that, an extension of all the different things that we do at Ventures on YouTube and on our website and whatnot. So we just really drilled down to like, all right, let's go over these topics. How can we make this accessible to the beginner? How can we break this stuff down in an audio format? And I didn't know if people were going to like it. I didn't know if anybody was going to listen. Apparently people do, though, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'm sure you can relate, Dave. It's
yeah.
You get behind the mic and you're like, okay, well, I hope somebody listens to this.
Anybody there?
Yeah, it's like sometimes there's almost a disconnect where you almost forget that folks are listening to it.
Yeah.
And then you start looking at the feedback, you're like, oh, like I just did a show yesterday and we had a question from a listener from Australia. And I was just sitting there for a minute. I was like, really? Australia? Like the Australia? Like they're listening all the way in Australia. It's just surreal. It's so cool, but it's also very intimidating and humbling all at the same time.
Yeah, it is. And I think you guys are doing a great job because, yeah, you know what you're doing. You're focused and you hit the topic. You're really good. You know, what we do here is mostly an interview show, but, you know, your topics are so highlighted. I think that's why it's great to have you on because today we're going to talk about flies, which is a big part of a challenge for anybody, right? You get there, you know, again, let's take it to the beginner. The beginner gets there, they get their fly rod, they're learning to cast, they're good enough to cast the fly out there 20, 30 feet. But then how do they catch one fish? And you hear a lot of guides, we've heard them on the podcast say, you know what? The biggest thing you got to get to with the beginner is get them catching fish. Because if they go get skunked for a long time, they're going to give it up. So the fly is the next most important thing. So we're going to talk today about how to choose the right fly, right?
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time thinking about what's the simplest way to pick the fly. Not what's the best way, but what's the simplest. Because one of the big problems, and I had this, my dad fly fished and he tied flies, and my grandpa fly fished and he tied flies. He tied flies commercially. So I grew up in that world, but my grandpa was an awful, awful teacher. And yeah, he's got a lot of other redeeming qualities, but you don't want him to teach you anything.
No.
Right? My dad, he didn't get enough time on the water, especially when I was a younger kid. So he wasn't the best teacher either. He tried, but he just didn't have the patience for it. And I don't blame him. I mean, you know, when you've got such limited time on the water, he was hauling me along and handing me a rod and just saying, here, have fun. Don't tangle it. So my learning curve, even in a family of anglers, was pretty steep. So I really sat down, and me and Alex, the other guy at Ventures that's in all of our content with us, we sat down and we tried to distill it to its most basic element. What we came up with, we tried to come up with a real fancy name for it, but we decided to just call it our right fly formula. And it's not proprietary. It's not secret or anything. I mean, Tom Rosenbauer, Kelly Gallup, they'll tell you the same things, right? And that is, if you follow the right fly formula, what you're looking for is the most important thing when you're picking a bug is to match the size first. So you get to the river, and if there's something hatching, right, you look around you and you see bugs that are buzzing on the water. Maybe there's a bunch of hoppers in the grass that you kicked up while you're walking to the river, right? Or maybe you see fish rising. So you take a minute to observe. And Dave, you and I talked about this in the episode that we did together, that it's so important to just sit and watch for a minute when you get to the river. And we can't overstate that for beginners. You've got to just sit, take a minute to watch what's going on, what's happening, because you will get some information there that you can use to help you inform your fly selection, right? So if you see, let's say you go out on the water right now, we're recording this, it's middle of April. So we're in the middle of some blue wing hatches here in my neck of the woods. Let's say you get to the river and you see the fish rising and you see a bug on the water. It's got those big upright wings, looks like a sailboat. You want to first match the size. So you're going to look in your box and you're going to try and find a dry fly that matches that size. Once you've got the size figured out, then you move on to the next important thing, or the next most important thing, which is the shape. You got to go size first, and then you go shape. And with mayflies, they've got the long, slender body, the very thin tails, and the nice fine wings. So your parachute Adams would be a wonderful imitation for a blue wing. If you've got a parachute blue wing, that'd work great too. But you're just trying to find something that looks relatively close to what bug you pulled off the water. And then the thing that matters the least is the color. Sometimes color is going to matter. If you get out on a tailwater and these fish see like 5,000 flies a day, and they will get to the point where they're like, no, that's the wrong shade of Adams gray. Pardon me. I need this other shade of Adams gray before I bite that. They will get that picky, but color, it very rarely matters. And even here, I was out a week and a half ago. I was out fishing, and it started spitting snow on me, but the mayflies were hatching, and I didn't have any blue-winged olives with me. All I had were parachute Adams, but the Adams was actually dark enough. It matched how dark-bodied those blue wings were, and I caught a couple fish on that. So, but it was the right size, and then it was the right shape. And the color it doesn't matter that much. And I mean, you look at the Perdigons, for example, the guy with like a pink hotspot on him, or the Frenchie even. I mean, that bright red hotspot on the Frenchie. I mean, that's just to provide contrast. I was reading somewhere, I can't remember where, I wish I could so I could credit the author, but they were talking about trout eyesight. And it was really interesting because trout are less attracted to colors, according to this author. They're less attracted to certain colors than they are contrast. That's what really attracts them. I think that's why you see so many successful flies have a lot of contrast built into them. It's not necessarily the color that they're using. It's how those colors contrast with each other, right? You look at the Griffiths net, you've got the black and white hackle with a really dark body, right? That contrasts really well. But you can do that right fly formula, though. You can practice that with nymphs as well as dries. It doesn't have to just be a dry fly. I mean, you get to the water, let's say nothing's rising, which is usually the case, right? A hatch is a much more rare event than getting to the water and just not seeing fish up. Well, they're still eating. We know that. They eat. I mean, folks say it's like around 70, 80% of a trout's diet is subsurface. So I've seen some folks say it's as high as 90%, which, I mean, I don't know how we know that. I'd like to know the intern that was tasked with that study one afternoon, right?
That would be good to see where the citation on that one, because everybody said that forever, but I've never seen the article.
Yeah. It's like spend the whole summer and you need to observe every trout in this river, sample their stomachs. Yeah.
Well, you know who it probably was? I always go back to the Caddis wrote the book, LaFontaine.
Gary LaFontaine, yeah.
Right. I mean, it was probably him or somebody, one of his buddies, because those guys were like super nerds and were awesome.
I could see him or Bob Benke do it, the researcher, the PhD guy. He did a ton of stuff on trout. So the late guy, we lost them both, LaFontaine and Benke.
Wow, that's right. I know. Yeah, it's crazy. Gosh. Okay. So that's the start of it. Basically, size, shape, color, right? So
it really is that simple. And I mean, it helps to know like what's hatching, generally. It helps to know, like, all right, this is what a caddis is. This is what a mayfly is.
Yeah. And where do you figure that? How do you figure that stuff out? What's your recommendation? Somebody without going, because I guess you don't want to go too deep into the entomology, right? To
Yeah.
get too confused. But what do you, hey, stay on the beginner. So beginner, what do you tell them to learn a little bit about that?
So the best thing you can do is go to a fly shop and ask about the local river that you've got going on, because they're going to be able to give you the most in-depth info about what's hatching. But not everybody's got a local fly shop, and not everybody's on a river either. So a lot of this comes down to just making sure that you give yourself a basic education on, this is what a caddis looks like, this is what a mayfly looks like, this is what a stonefly looks like, these are their nymphs. That's not going too deep down the entomology rabbit hole. And you don't need to know the Latin names. You don't need to be that guy out on the water that can spout off the subspecies of this particular variant of this mayfly. You don't need to be that feller at all. But it does pay to spend some time just reviewing that information as much as you can. Because at the end of the day, yeah, you can't just go out to the water with no bug knowledge at all and just purely based on matching bugs that you see in the water to bugs in your box. You can get a relatively decent match, and you could probably catch a fish just based off of that. But you're going to take that next step. You're going to go from that very basic beginner to kind of like an intermediate beginner. Once you're able to say, okay, that's definitely a caddis. That is 100% a caddis. And that just comes with time and just doing a little bit of research. I mean, that information's out there. It's everywhere. And we're actually working on a new project at Adventures about bugs that we've got coming up, I think, later this year. So all about bugs. So that information's out there. We're coming out with it. We've got a whole series of blog posts as well about it. And we're not the only place to go for it either. I mean, there's a whole bunch of info out there.
This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory, where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. It's time to experience eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. Imagine your perfect cast in the pristine waters of Bristol Bay, the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. Togiak Lodge sits in this unique paradise, offering unmatched fishing amidst breathtaking landscapes. Envision yourself right now amidst nature's best, with every fish narrating its own epic tale. You can visit togiaklodge.com right now. That's Togiak, Togiak. Your story woven into the fabric of Bristol Bay, where every cast is a memory, every fish is unforgettable. If somebody wanted to learn more about, like, let's just say somebody's coming in, you want to send them somewhere on your site, where do you put them to go get more of this information? Maybe just on like 101, choosing flies, selecting, all that. Do you have a resource?
It's just going to be our masterclass, our beginner fly fishing masterclass. We've got, which episode is it? Now I'm not going to be able to remember off the top of my head.
Well, we can track it down.
Yeah, it's in there. And you'll see that we've got a whole episode on picking the right fly coming up. We've got a few other resources that are available as well.
Yeah, so Ventures Flyco, and then go just look for the master classes. You can find it there.
Yeah, we've got them linked on the website and then on YouTube.
Okay, so let's just take it to, and where are you now physically? Where's your location?
I'm in Wyoming right now.
Oh, you're in Wyoming?
Yeah, out in the middle of nowhere.
Gotcha. So you grew up in Utah and headed up north a little bit.
Yeah, I did. Got away from the crowds, got to a place where we could actually afford a house.
What part of Wyoming are you in?
We're in the northern part. So.
Oh, northern part. Okay, so near Montana or
yeah. Yeah, I'm not too far from Yellowstone, so it's a good place to be.
Yeah, it is. It is. That is a good part of the country. So you're up there, and so let's just take it to somebody. Let's just say they're going into Yellowstone, right? They're going in there and they want to fish dries. Say they're going in, they land on, you name the stream. So they get prepared. They know kind of what's out there. Is there anything else to know to get prepared? Like things start hatching, do you have to catch those dry flies? How do you actually get the bugs? There's
a lot of different ways. I mean, let's say you go to the fire hole. I went there last October, right before it closed, because we were out elk hunting, and me and my buddy both got a little frustrated. So we're like, we're going to go fish for a day because the elk are pissing us off. So
yeah,
we're like, we'll go to Yellowstone and fish. So we go into Yellowstone, we fish, and there's a pretty good blue wing hatch going on, late season blue wing hatch going on. And yeah, you can certainly just grab the flies out of the air. I know Tom Rosenbauer talks about taking your hat off and just wave it around, and you usually grab a couple that way. I've also found too that if you just like sit on the bank for a minute, which you should be doing anyways, because you should be watching, you'll usually get some bugs crawling up on you. That's not too crazy to have that happen. I was just out last week. I was just out fishing, and the stoneflies are out everywhere around here right now.
The big stones, or
Yeah, we've got both. We've got really tiny little ones, and then we've got, I didn't know this, but I think we've got like some squallas out here.
Oh wow!
I had zero idea that we had them in this part of Wyoming, but we do. So I was just by myself, but they were crawling all over me. And so, I mean, at that point, it's really easy to see, like, all right, if this bug's crawling all over me, I should probably try and match that. And I did. I threw on a Pat's rubber legs because that's one of your basic patterns that imitates a stonefly. And really, as an angler too, like as a trout angler, what you should be focused on, because you walk into, I grew up going into Sportsman's Warehouse. That was our big box store.
Oh yeah.
But Sportsman's or Cabela's or does Bass Pro sell flies? I don't even know.
I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But whatever your big box store is that sells flies, if you walk in and they've got however many thousands of flies sitting there in the bins, and you're like, well, I don't know where to start. What the heck is going on here? As a trout angler, your focus should really just be caddis, midges, and mayflies. If you have bugs that imitate those flies, you're going to be set, because that's the vast majority of a trout's diet in every trout stream, almost in the whole world. There are going to be some that have a really prolific stonefly hatch, for example, like we just talked about. But not every river has stoneflies. One of my favorite rivers out here, it's a little Spring Creek, doesn't have stoneflies. So not every river is going to have stoneflies, but every river's got caddis, mayflies, and midges in huge, huge numbers. So if you're just going in and you're like, all right, I'm going to stock my box up, get like your zebra midges, get some midge adults like a Griffiths gnat or whatever, get some Frenchies or pheasant tails. Those are wonderful caddis larvae, right? Get a couple elk-hair caddis, get some emerging caddis or egg-laying caddis. Those are great ones to have. And then, grab like a couple mayflies. There's all sorts of mayfly nymphs. I fish a lot of classic flies, so I've got a lot of hare's ears. The Jujubatus is another great one. That's a Charlie Craven fly that I love. Your little perdigons are wonderful for mayfly imitations. And really, you look at it, I mean, there's maybe 12 to 15 patterns that you need to actually get started when you get down to it.
And you just named probably what you just named there, 8 or 10 of them right there.
Yeah. And, I could really get a little bit more granular if you want me to, but it really is that simple. You just need your midges, your caddis, your mayflies. You need a few bugs that represent, and I guess too, for the beginners, it's good to remember that your bugs, generally speaking, they're going to start out in the water as a nymph. They might be a larva or they might be a pupa, depending on their species, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is they're the nymph when they're under the water, and then they emerge out of the water and they become the adult version of that. We often refer to it as a dun, right? So you want a nymph version and an adult version of all those flies. Now, there are like specific emerger patterns and there are crippled patterns. You can really get into that. There's like a mating midge or a midge cluster or whatever. You can get into all that stuff. And that's good to know, but that's kind of further down the road. I don't want to tell a beginner, all right, here's an emerging mayfly, here's a sparkle dun, here's a last chance cripple. This is how to tell that apart, because then you're really getting into the looking at rise forms and understanding that, which, again, I think you'll naturally go down that path, but that's not where the beginner needs to be.
Yeah, for the beginner, it's get those basic patterns that will cover most of the potential. And then, like you said, get the stream, observe, sit back. If you see some, so what if you're sitting back and you see some fish rising? Is the next step to put on that dry fly and try to cast right over that? Like, how do they decide whether they're going to do that or put on a nymph and all that?
Well, if you've got the fish rising, definitely cast to them. I mean, I've got a reputation among my fishing buddies that if I even see one fish rise, I will tie on a dry fly and cast to it. It's not always a good thing to have happen. I was out on the Yellowstone in Montana in, when was it? December, I think, with the guys from Squala fishing up there.
Oh yeah.
And we'd been throwing streamers all day, and we got towards the end of the float and we found a pod of like they were like this big, like 7-inch cutthroat. They were tiny, but they were rising. And so I made poor Rich, my buddy from Squala, I made him sit there in back row and hold me in place so that I could
to get the 7-inchers.
And that's how I knew he was a good friend at that point, because he did that for me.
So you hooked up?
I did. I caught a couple. And Rich, I think he said something to the effect of, he's like, that's the hardest I've worked for a small fish like that in a long time. I said, well, you're welcome. But yeah, to kind of get back from that little tangent. Yeah, if you see that fish rising, throw a dry fly at it, tie a dry fly on, as long as you feel like you've got something that matches it, and throw it upstream to that fish first. Your presentation at that point is going to matter a lot more than the fly choice. And I know earlier, Dave, you said that, some folks will tell you that pattern doesn't really matter a lot. And yeah, I agree sometimes with them, because I think presentation matters more than pattern when you get down to it, at least for trout. I don't know about steelhead. My experience saltwater fishing is very limited. I've been a trout guy my whole life. So, but at least with trout, if you can I would rather have 5 perfect drifts with the not perfect fly than 10 okay drifts with the perfect fly, because chances are those perfect drifts are going to catch you the fish, even if the fly is not an exact match, because the trout are going to see that. And as long as you're not throwing like a hopper in the middle of a midge hatch, the trout's going to see that, and they make that positive association that, oh, that looks like food. They're going to go up and eat it.
Yeah. And why do you think that fish, with all of the naturals coming off, sometimes in a buzz of, thousands of bugs, why does it take our fly? Like, you know what I mean? Do you think that's just seems kind of crazy, right? With all those naturals, but maybe that's the thing. Our fly, is it a good idea to occasionally make it look a little different than the other ones, right? And
that's why, if you ever get into the fly tying side of things, I tell you, don't worry about making your flies look perfect, because everybody wants their flies to look perfect. And if every fly looks perfect, how is yours going to stand out?
Right. Like that perfect, I always picture the perfect Catskill dry fly, which is like, you see them online on Instagram, like, man, I've never been able to tie a fly that perfect in my life. Right.
Yeah, neither have I. Yeah.
But those catch fish, but do they catch fish more than your fly that's just your normal, I don't know. Right.
Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know that, again, that's one of those projects we need a summer intern on to tell you whether or not
that's
that
right.
works. Yeah.
To test the Catskills versus the Adams parachute or whatever.
Yeah, but I've watched buddies of mine catch fish on a Griffiths net that was so chewed up it was literally just thread on a hook. That was all that was left, and they were still catching fish on it. And I think you fish long enough, everybody's got a story or two like that, where the hatch was just so good and the fish were throwing themselves at it. But the lesson to learn from that is that the presentation matters more, because I did this especially as a new angler, I did this all the time, where I'd make like 2 or 3 casts and the fish didn't eat it. And I was like, well, that's the wrong fly. And I'd just cycle through flies, and I'd go through, and I'd look in my box and be like, I don't have enough flies. And I really, really worried about that as a newer angler. I was so concerned that I didn't have enough flies, that I was going to be missing out on something if I didn't put the right fly on. I was going to not catch a fish. And then I've kind of swung back to where I added it up the other day, because I was kind of doing my spring inventory of like what flies I need to tie. And I think I fished maybe 18 or 19 different patterns total, which when you really get down to it, that's not that many.
That's nymphs and druts, everything?
Nymphs, dries, streamers, emergers. Yeah, the whole gamut. That's all of them.
That's perfect.
And yeah, it really is. I mean, I fish a lot of Paragones. I fish Frenchies, hare's ears, like I mentioned, zebra midges, Sparkle Duns. Sparkle Dun might be my favorite fly.
Oh, is that like the caddis? That's a caddis imitation?
It's mayfly.
Oh, that is a mayfly. Okay.
Yeah, the little mayfly, emerger / cripple mayfly looking thing. I love those flies. I don't know, sometimes you fish a fly with confidence, and I think that makes a difference too. But yeah, I mean, there's really not a whole ton of patterns that I use when it gets down to it, because your presentation is going to make such a big difference. And that's where, spend time working on identifying bugs, spend time learning how to pick the right fly, but spend an equal amount of time making sure your drifts are good, making sure you don't have drag, making sure that you're putting that fly down and in that trout's window. Make sure you can cast. To me, the definition of a good caster is somebody that can get their fly where they want to get it, like 90% of the time. So if you can do that and you botch 10% of your cast, you're going to be just fine.
Is that within a pie plate distance of the where you want to go, or how close do you have to get?
Yeah, within 10 inches usually.
Yeah.
I mean, trout, they'll move for food, and especially really wild ones. Tailwater trout usually won't always move for food. Just depends on the tailwater you're on more than anything. But yeah, spend some time really making sure you can land that fly where you want it to. And I would argue that is going to almost be more helpful than spending time learning every different type of insect that's out there. Because that stuff, you spend enough time doing this, you'll kind of start to soak up that knowledge anyways when you're out on the water. And even when you're not on the water, you're spending time, you're listening to podcasts like this one, you're watching videos, you're reading stuff about it, right? It's not like the only place you can learn about bugs is while you're out on the river. You can spend a lot of time doing that when you should be working or, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But the only time you can really practice your casting is either if you're on the water or if you can, get away for a half hour and go out in the yard or go to a park somewhere and practice.
That's it. Okay. So you mentioned at the start the three main things. Anything else we should be knowing about picking a fly, selecting a fly? Anything else you want to throw out there?
I think that covers it. I mean, size, then shape, then color. And if you can do those three and really focus on getting the best match possible, you're going to be in business. You're going to start catching fish. It really is that simple. I know we've talked about this a lot, but I'll hammer it one more time. And that is, you're only going to be successful using that technique if you're willing to take a minute and observe your surroundings. I mean, turn over like 3 rocks. Look at what's underneath the rocks. Reach in the water, turn over a rock or two, look, match the bugs that are underneath the rocks to what's in your box, and you're going to be set at that point.
Yeah, turn over the rocks, and then do you go through a little bit, like get a little tray and pour them in there and have your, put them in a vial, and do you go that? Do you have them all in from? We used to, when I was a kid, we collect them in we actually used formaldehyde back in the day.
Yeah,
I still have my formaldehyde bugs from when I was a kid. Did you ever do any of that stuff, or do you get technical like that?
No, I've got a buddy of mine who's got a bunch of stoneflies in vials on his tying desk, and it's really cool. And he ties the best looking stonefly nymphs I've ever seen.
He's got them right there.
Yeah, but that's almost like too much work for me.
Yeah, it is. No, it's funny because I still have my kick net, and I learned from Rick Hafley, who's been on our podcast a couple times. He's an entomologist out west here. And it was pretty cool because when I was a kid, he was in my dad's fly shop, and I was going to these classes and watching him do his entomology. So I learned a little bit, about entomology, but not at the level of him as a PhD sort of thing. But again, it just gives you enough. And I still struggle with a lot of things, right? That's the crazy thing. I've been doing this all my life, and I still struggle with even caddis. Like, how do you, caddis are not the easiest hatches to catch fish on, right? Do you have a secret to tips? Any tips there?
I think the biggest thing to remember with caddis is that when you see them buzzing over the water is not when they hatched, right? Because when they hatch, they get up off of the water really quick. They don't spend a whole lot of time on the water. And when you usually see big clouds of caddis is when they're coming back to mate and lay eggs.
Right. They're up in the trees. You might see millions of them in the trees, and your lantern at the end of the night is just coated in caddis those nights. So they're buzzing, they're getting ready to mate, and then they're going to at some point lay eggs. And then is that the time you want to target them with the fish?
Yeah, that's the time when you want to look at them with the fish. And I mean, if there's so many caddis in the air, chances are a few of them are dropping to the bottom or not making it or getting close enough to the water surface that the fish will key in on them then. But it's also a really good idea at that point. If you see so many caddis that are coming back to the water, well, maybe the next wave are getting ready to emerge. So maybe that's when you tie on your dry dropper and you fish your caddis like a Frenchie underneath it, because that's that caddis nymph, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the Frenchie is supposed to imitate, caddis or mayfly nymph, right?
Yep.
And so you drift that through. I love that dry dropper approach. That's the way I fish probably 90% of the time is dry dropper. Because you get to cover so much. You get to cover the dry, but you get to cover the nymph stage as well. And it's really great for those caddis hatches because, like you said, it can be tough. And one thing that I've started doing the last year or so, Alex over at Ventures, he started tying up these little caddis emergers. Got a little bit of green on them, and they look really good. And I think they're in our fly collections. I can't remember.
Yeah. Describe this cat. I'm curious about this caddis emerger. Describe it a little bit. Is this or is there a name, or because we use a caddis emerger too? I'm curious to hear if it's close.
It's Alex's fly, and I'm sure, I don't know if he came up with it, but it's little Elcare wing, a very sparse Elcare wing. You can throw polypro yarn in there too if you need to.
Sure, just right in the front.
Yeah, a lot of dubbing up front to kind of stimulate the legs, and then a thinly tapered green body with a little bit of antron sticking out the back for some flash.
Gotcha. So like a green, like a nice bright green,
Yeah.
or more of a
like a nice bright green. And that seems to work really well, especially earlier in the summer when the caddis really start moving, because they don't really start moving until, at least around here, they usually don't start moving until about June. That's when you start to see a lot of big caddis hatches. And then they'll go. You'll have caddis hatch, not all day, but all summer. Yeah, you'll have them go until fall. And then you got the October caddis that comes out at the end. And I love fishing those. Those are fun.
And how do you fish the Octobers?
I just fish a big dry. I got to find some more of it. I found this orange dubbing that's the perfect match for October caddis, and I don't even know what kind it is. It was just a random package of dubbing I found. I acquired some fly tying materials for my grandpa when he wasn't looking, and
Yeah,
it was in there. So,
right. There you go.
it was fun
Love it.
to find those. But yeah, caddis hatches are tough, and I still don't have all the answers on them. I wish I did.
Yeah.
That little caddis emerger pattern has really helped the last year or so.
How are you fishing that emerger?
I'll just fish it right off the back of the Elcare, the dry fly, or we've even had success nymphing those pretty deep too, like sticking them underneath a stonefly nymph and getting it right down to the bottom. The fish will eat that too. We were in North Idaho fishing, and there were PMDs, golden stones, and caddis hatching all at the same time. It was ridiculous, but they were keyed in on the caddis, and I remember Alex was kicking my butt with that little caddis emerger, and he was fishing it real deep right down at the bottom. So that one, we use that one a lot because we can kind of fish it everywhere. It's kind of a do-it-all caddis nymph emerger type thing.
Imagine embarking on a journey to Alaska, that ultimate destination for adventure seekers. With Fishhound Expeditions, this dream can become your reality. Picture yourself amidst the wild Alaskan landscape where the northern lights dance across the sky and you're reeling in some of the biggest rainbow trout you've ever seen. It's an experience that feels like a dream, but with Fishhound, it's an adventure waiting to happen. If Alaska is on your bucket list, Fishhound Expeditions is the key to unlocking that dream. Visit fishhoundexpeditions.com today and mention that you discovered them through this podcast. That's FISHHOUND Expeditions. Don't just dream about Alaska, experience it with Fishhound. It's time to talk about something that elevates your fishing experience. Stonefly nets. Nestled in the heart of the Ozarks, Ethan, a master craftsman, dedicates his skill to creating the finest wood landing nets. They aren't just tools, they are works of art blending tradition and craftsmanship. You know, every time I set my stonefly net in the water, it's not just the fish that catches my eye, it's the beauty of the net itself. These nets are tailored to your fishing style with options to customize the size, handle, and even the intricate wood burls. They are a perfect mix of functionality and aesthetic appeal. And let's talk about the memories. Just like Ethan, many of us cherish fly fishing as a way to connect with our past and creating lasting memories. Stonefly nets are more than just nets. They are part of our story, each cast and every cast. Are you ready to make fishing trips unforgettable? Visit stoneflynets.com right now and discover the difference a handcrafted net can make.
So this is good, and I think what we'll do is send people out to go deeper into the masterclass series to talk more about this. But I want to hear a little bit on the podcast. So maybe describe. We highlighted this at the start, the Untangled, but what's the content? What do you have coming? What have you got out there? How do you choose your topics? What's that look like?
Yeah, so the Untangled podcast primarily is fueled by questions from listeners. So it started out completely like Q&A based. That was all we did. And now I do the first part of the show where I take a really deep dive into one question or one topic. And then the last half of the show is Q&A, where maybe the questions, they don't need a 20-minute answer, but they need like a 5-minute answer. So we dive into kind of those questions. So I try to make the show flow a little bit that way. We just did a show with the folks over at Winston, talking everything you need to know about fly rods. We did one all about waders with the folks over at Squala. We did the show with you where you distilled 600 tips from all the interviews you've done.
Yep.
And that was incredibly valuable because when you get that big of a data set to pull from and to say these are the most valuable tips, that was really, really good. So we were able to do that. The show I did yesterday was about how trout behave, which was a lot of fun to research and do a little bit more about that.
Talk about that a little bit. So you do some pretty thorough research on some of your solo episodes.
Yeah, I do, because I'm no expert by any means. I love to fish. I consider myself adept at it. I can do it. I mean, we've heard that quote, you got to spend 10,000 hours doing something before you're an expert. I know I've spent 10,000 hours doing it, but I'm no expert. So
have you ever heard this one where if you only have to know 10% more than the person below you to be really helpful, like to even to teach.
Yeah.
You know, and you actually might be a better teacher that, although there's tons of great people way up. I saw Kelly Gallup online doing something today about Euro nipping. But
I watched that. It was
you saw that. But you got people like Kelly, but you also have the people that maybe they're so far up there, they can't really even think about what it's like to be a beginner anymore.
Yeah.
So they're maybe not the best person to teach the beginner. That's a challenge too.
It is. And that's something that I have to constantly pull myself back into, because sometimes I'll be like, do I really need to talk about mending again today? Like, we know mending. Let's move on. No, not everybody does. I didn't know mending for a good long while. I had to have somebody show me. And I get a ton of fulfillment out of that. We get pictures all the time from folks who've caught fish after watching one of our masterclass videos or listening to the podcast. And that is just one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done, is having that experience. So I love being able to do that and just getting out and hearing from the folks who've been able to fish. But that's how the show works. Every week we get a new episode. Every other week we've got new masterclass episodes on YouTube. So we're busy.
Pumping it out.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the Mid-Current. So you're also doing the editing. Talk about that a little bit. What's your role at Mid-Current?
Yeah, so I'm the news and gear editor over at Mid-Current. So I curate all the news stories, help folks understand what's going on in the news or in the fly fishing industry. And then I do at least one gear column a month at Mid-Current, if not more. A mix of gear reviews and then how to pick the right gear for you. Or I just did a column a couple weeks ago about BOA laces versus traditional laces, because I broke one of my BOA laces. I had to pull out my old school boots.
Is that still, that's like what is that, a metal? Or what
It's just a wire that you twist with a knob. Yeah. And I love it. It's super convenient, but I think I actually might like the traditional laces more, because it's I feel like I get a better, more comfortable fit in the boot, but just stuff like that. So, and then I do gear reviews and some of the more story-oriented writing there for Hatch Magazine as well.
For Hatch too. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find the gear reviews? In fact, I know there's always talk about the gear stuff, right? Like unbiased reviews, all this stuff. What's your take on? It seems like a challenge sometimes, right? There's so much gear out there. First of all, what do you review? And then what happens if the review isn't, what happens if it's not the greatest product, right? How do you, the transparency thing, right? Is that a challenge you find at all?
It is. It's tough. And especially I've been fortunate enough to do this long enough that I have relationships with some folks, and it's really tough to be like, hey, this fly rod sucks.
Yeah. Right.
It's really tough, but I don't sugarcoat things in my reviews. I know some folks do. I know some folks do it just because they want the gear and they just want to get all the gear. I've got more fly rods than
You don't need the gear.
Yeah, I've got more fly rods than I can use. I love fly rods. That's my favorite thing to review. I don't know why I love rods so much, but it's tough. I mean, I did a review a few years ago on a company's rods and they weren't that good. And I called them out. I said, this wasn't that good. I just got the new St. Croix Evos. I don't know if you heard, St. Croix came back into the fly fishing game.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And I've got that. I think it's sitting over there on my desk, actually.
Yeah.
I've been fishing with that for the last month or so, doing the review on it. And there's a lot that I really like about it, but there's also stuff I don't like about it. And that's going to go in the review, because St. Croix is asking to spend $975 on that rod, which is not an insignificant amount of money. So I reckon if you're going to spend that kind of money, then you need to understand what you're spending your money on, what you're getting. And the thing that I'm not stoked about with the Evos is I don't feel like there's enough feedback in that rod. For me personally, some folks might feel differently. And I try to make that clear. Like what I dislike about certain gear is what I dislike about it.
Yeah, you're right. It might be perfect for somebody else.
Exactly. You know, I prefer my favorite fly rods to fish are Winstons. I have 13 Winstons.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's a problem. I collect the vintage ones. And my wife even bought me one for my birthday a couple of years ago because it was such a good deal I found an old 8-foot 5-weight on eBay that she got me. But
Wow.
yeah, it was wonderful. The best wife in the world when she's buying you fly rods. You know,
That's amazing.
and I make no bones about that too. That like I prefer that style of fly rod.
Yeah. Which is what is that style? Is that a little bit not as fast of an action?
Yeah, it's more progressive action, more medium fast, and like the new Orvis H4 that just came out. I think they want $1,100 for it, $1,098 or whatever. And I made the point actually in that review that $1,098, that's a lot of money. But you look at when the H3 came out, it was 7 years ago, and the price for the new one only went up $100. That's actually pretty impressive when you factor in inflation. So I try to contextualize the cost of it too. And it was really interesting. I was doing this for that Helios review, actually. I spent a lot of time looking at old fly rods I found a Winston catalog actually from 1974. And they were just doing bamboo at the time. And their top tier bamboo rod went for like $275 in 74, which was the equivalent to $1,500 in 2024 money. So I'm like, we've always been paying up for these top tier rods. We've always been doing it.
Yeah.
The difference is the dollar amounts changed, but the percentage of what they cost is still roughly the same. So, you know, when you get into that cost end of things, you know, we can talk, okay, well, is it even worth it? But, you know, that's up to you as the angler to decide if it is worth it. My job as the reviewer is to give you all the information. And with that Helios, especially, Orvis made a lot of claims about it. And I spent a lot of time with the Orvis rod designer, Sean Combs, asking him, okay, well, explain this to me. You say it's 4 times more accurate. How? How did you measure that? Show me. And you see that in the review that I spent that time really trying to dig into it and give folks that information. But as wonderful as that Helios is, it doesn't have like the personality that some other rods do. It feels so good that it almost feels like cheating.
Really? And what do you mean by personality? How does a rod have personality?
It's really hard for me to describe, but this can sound really dumb, but I've got like an emotional connection to some of my fly rods. And I probably shouldn't, but I get so much joy from fishing them because the action's so perfect. It balances so perfectly in my hand.
Right.
That it's just, I build bamboo fly rods as well.
Oh, you do? Wow.
Yeah. And so that gives you another indication of the kind of action that I love. You know, that really slow stuff. I love it. So if that's what I really love, that's the stuff I'm going to connect with. The Orvis, it is a fantastic fishing tool. It is the most impressive rod I've probably ever fished based on what it can do. But it didn't connect with me personality-wise the same way that other rods have. Now, I would still highly, like if you want the best rod on the market, best that money can buy, then that needs to be in your consideration because it is one of them. It is just flat out impressive.
Right. And that's based on what are a few of the key factors that are on. We've had, you know, I go back to the episode. I always go back to Tim Ray-Jeff when he was on. He talked about Echo and he talked about weight, speed, durability. I think those were the 3. And he said, you know, you got the 3 things and rods can't have all 3. You know, they might have 2 of them, but you got to, if you know, for example, if you got the most durable rod, then it's going to have to be less than the other categories, right? So did Orvis create this rod that seems like it's top of the line in everything?
It feels like it to me. I mean, jury's out on durability because that rod, when did that rod launch? Was it February, I think? And we're in April, so 2 months. So,
and it's a super fast, like really nice, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's a faster. It's as fast as the H3. It felt to me. And that's the other thing too. Like I don't have the equipment to quantify a lot of my observations.
It's just your feel.
Yeah. So a lot of it is like, well, this is what it feels like to me. So yeah, it felt just as fast as the H3. I have 3 H3s. I love them. They're wonderful sticks. I've got a 4-weight, a 6-weight, and an 8-weight. And I've fished that 8-weight. That 8-weight's caught a ton of different fish for me. It's just a super versatile rod. The H4 felt faster and it felt lighter. I don't have the specs off the top of my head, but it certainly felt very at least as light as the H3, which was not a heavy rod. So, we'll see where the durability comes into. I know Orvis had some issues on durability with the H3, but, we'll just see where it gets to in a year from now.
Gotcha. On gear, do you review all sorts of different types of fly gear out there? What are any new, give us a few little new items or things you've seen that you've been liking out there over the last year? Anything new that's out there?
Yeah, I'm really big on Squala's stuff. Their Backety waders are my favorite waders right now. I really like their stuff. Everything Squala's putting out, I'm happy with.
Yeah, it's super high quality.
Yeah, it's worth the money.
I've been talking about it, but I've been wearing one of their, I think it's one of their, the hoodies, and the thing is just, I don't know how they make it, but it's hard to take off. It's so soft. It's got it right. I mean, they got the materials down, I think.
Yeah, I love their stuff. Another one to definitely shout out, the new Thomas & Thomas Avant 2 fly rod. We're really impressed with that. I just sent that one back. Because another misconception a lot of folks get, like they think gear reviewers get to keep everything. And it really just depends. But I've got half a dozen rod reviews that I have scheduled until August. And those are all like loaner rods. The company sends them to me, I fish and I send it back. And that is far more common than them just sending it and saying, oh yeah, you get to keep it. That is a very rare occurrence.
Yeah, that is. Oh, that's good. That's good to know. Yeah, I didn't know that. I think that's the assumption that a lot of people out there are just, you're getting this, you're doing the review, a good review, and you're getting a free rod.
Yeah, that is not usually the case. Another good one, Douglas. I love their fly rods. I think they make a great rod. They just came out with their DXF2. So it's the second generation of that DXF series, which I've really enjoyed. And those, I've got a 9-foot 5-weight of that coming to review. It should be here soon. So I'm really excited to get that out on the water. I know Corkers has their new Wade Light boots coming out. And I've talked to some folks who are pretty happy with what they've seen. So I don't have my hands on those yet, but they've got some good stuff. The Sims G4Z wader that came out, I was pretty happy with that. It feels like, almost feels like you're wearing a tux on the water. It's so fun.
Yeah, Sims has good stuff too.
Yeah, this nice set of waders. Scientific Anglers just came out with their saltwater fly fishing lines, which I know enough about line design to appreciate what they were able to do with that. It's just really impressive stuff there that they came out with. Oh, who else? Off the top of my head. I mean, there's some other stuff, but I have to remember like what I can and can't say.
Right. Yeah, no, you got some good stuff. There's some great brands.
Yeah. I had a meeting yesterday with a company that they had me sign an NDA for it.
Oh, really?
They're like, yeah, we can't have this out. And I was like, okay, I wasn't going to tell anybody, but I will take this very seriously now.
Yeah, right.
And what they showed me was really cool. So I'm excited for that stuff to make it out to the fly fishing public soon.
Gotcha. So these gear, this stuff people can go to just mid-current. Is that the best place to track some of this down?
Yeah, mid-current, and mid-current's where I do the bulk of it. Still doing some stuff over a hatch, but yeah, it's where you're going to find the bulk of it. It's over there, mid-current.
Awesome. Well, this has been good. I think we've got, it's going to be fun staying in touch because you got a lot going. I think we've done this podcast, a couple here now.
Yeah.
And we got some good stuff going too. We're going to be, that's part of our thing. We're launching a little bit of a community trying to get more support, right, for people listening to the podcast. And part of that is, people that are new to it. So I'm trying to get some resources for people that as they come in the door to be like, yep, go here. And it feels like that's what you guys have done at your site. Your focus is making it really easy. Even if they don't go into a fly shop, they could go to your site and figure out how to do it.
Yeah, that's the goal. We want to be basically your online fly shop, right? That's not intimidating to go into because not every fly shop is super friendly. So, unfortunately.
That's still the case. I guess, we talked about that too, right?
Yeah.
There's still some fly shops that aren't the easiest to hang out, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. But, and, beginners too. I mean, don't shy away from your stuff, Dave. I mean, you guys have a lot of great stuff over there that beginners can take a deep dive in almost any direction that they want to go in on your stuff. If they really get into something and they're like, oh, I need to know more about that. Well, I'm sure Dave's got at least one podcast episode on it, if not more.
We likely do. That's the thing. We've got probably at least one. I always search our own site just as I'm doing my own search. But I think we need to do a better job of, now that we're at 600 episodes plus, of getting it in for the little buckets.
Yeah.
So people, when they come in, and that's the idea with this group, is that making it like, okay, here's a little bucket and then whatever you need.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not easy when you got all this content. But that's why I think you guys have done a good job at organizing it and all that. So
Well, thank you.
So I'm going to keep, I think, like you said at the start, I'm going to keep sending people out your way and following you. What's next as you look ahead? You know, we're in April. It's going to be May 2024. As you look out into the rest of this year, anything new coming for you? What can we expect?
We're going to be finishing up the beginner fly fishing masterclass adventures. So the last episode will be coming out, I think in August is when the last one's scheduled to come out. I might be wrong on that.
This will complete the whole series.
Yeah, so the whole beginner fly fishing masterclass will be done.
Wow.
And then we are starting, actually next week, we are heading off for our first shoot on our bug masterclass. So it is going to be everything you need to know about bugs, and it's not beginner level. It is, you know how to fly fish, you can pick the right fly. This is, okay, here's everything to know about a midge. Here's everything to know about caddis. Here's all the different mayflies. And we're heading off to start shooting that. That's going to be an incredible undertaking. We did not realize how much work it was going to be. We've spent the last month just prepping, and we're still not done. But we've got to start getting footage because, you know, we're getting into that part of the year. So that's going to be the big thing coming up for us. And then we've got some newer ebooks and whatnot that we've got as well. There's one on picking the right fly that we've got as well. We'll make sure I shoot you over a link for that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's, I think the title of it is How to Pick the Right Fly for Every Fishing Situation, I think is what we titled it. So that's available for folks to look at. We just updated our fly rod that we sell in our starter packs as well. So it's the same blank. We just dressed it up a little bit. It looks prettier. So I got to help design that.
So this is one of you guys have your own products, some of your own products over there.
Yeah, we've got a lot of our own stuff. We got our fly collections. We're in the process of revamping the fly collections too, and upping the quality and working on adding some fun new patterns so folks will get a lot there. And we're fingers crossed we're going to have our vise out soon.
Oh,
our
wow.
New fly tying vise is going to be coming out because
amazing.
We had the old one and it was okay, but we kind of rushed it a little bit, and there were so many little things we wanted to do. Instead of ordering new ones of those, we decided, you know what, let's hold off. We're going to put the best thing we can out on the market. So we are in the process of getting that put together, and that's eating up a lot of time.
Sweet. And does that mean you're getting into other fly tying materials, all that stuff?
Yeah, we're going to be expanding that too. So there's going to be a lot of stuff going on adventures for the rest of 2024.
Yeah. Wow. You guys are going to be busy.
Yeah. Yes, we are.
That's good. Well, it's good to hear. So I guess, yeah, we'll send everybody out to venturesflyco.com and of course the Untangled podcast and Midcurrent as well. So yeah, Spencer, this has been awesome. I'm excited, like I said, to keep in touch and follow your journey as you guys keep taking that next step. And yeah, thanks for putting in the time today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey, of course, Dave. Thank you.
If you're new to fly fishing or know somebody new, please head over and check out Spencer's blog, his podcast. Check it all out right now. He's got a bunch of great resources, especially if you're brand new. They cover it all over there. We've got a new thing coming as well. If you go to wetflyswing.com/pro, you can check out the new program we're building. This is where you can connect and you can take this conversation further on the podcast. And we're going to be launching this thing in the next few months. So if you want to get in and be one of the early birds in there and find out what we have going, we're going to be unveiling this not too far off this year. So enter your name there and we'll let you know when we get this thing ready to go. All right, that's all we have. It's great to have Spencer on the podcast today. I hope we get him back on soon. I hope you connect. If you haven't yet, connect with Spencer. Let him know you heard him on this podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.